Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of pure, unfiltered precision. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points and says, there it is. That's the problem.
Yeah.
We crave that kind of binary reality.
It is, it's incredibly comforting to have a visual, categorized, indisputable fact. I mean, human beings are fundamentally wired to want certainty, especially when the stakes are high.
Exactly. But then you step into the world of multi-billion-dollar construction and real estate.
Oh, boy.
Right, particularly in the booming GCC market, the Gulf Cooperation Council, and suddenly that X-ray machine is just completely broken. We're looking at a financial and diagnostic landscape that is just entirely murky.
It's worse than murky. It's often a landscape built entirely on collective structural fiction.
Okay, let's unpack this. Today we are taking a deep dive into the systemic impact of unrealistic cost planning in the GCC construction and real estate market. And to do this, we are looking at a massive stack of data. So professional masterclass slides, dispute resolution manuals, major industry benchmarking reports, and standard contract administration guidelines.
A lot of material.
It is a lot. The mission today is to map the butterfly effect of a bad budget. We want to trace how an unrealistic number on day one inevitably leads to a total collapse of trust, massive legal disputes, and just a broken supply chain down the line.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you, the listener, a question right out of the gate. Have you ever started a project at work or even a home renovation where the initial budget seemed just a little too good to be true?
Right.
Because today we are going to show you exactly how that plays out on a multi-billion-dollar scale.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the original sin of these mega projects always starts in a boardroom, years before a shovel even hits the dirt.
Right.
It's the fundamental misalignment between a project's grand design ambition and its actual financial reality.
But how does that misalignment even happen? I mean, these are sophisticated developers and contractors. We aren't talking about a guy building a shed in his backyard.
What's fascinating here is the illusion of certainty that the entire industry operates under. We desperately want construction to function like modern manufacturing.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So if you build an electric vehicle on an automated assembly line, down to the fraction of a cent what the chassis costs.
Right, because the environment is perfectly controlled.
Exactly. Construction is the exact opposite. You are building bespoke prototypes outside in the weather, in the dirt.
And yet they price it like they are stamping out widgets.
Yes. They rely heavily on historical cost data. An estimator will say, well, we built a 50-story residential tower last year for this amount per square foot. So this new 50-story tower across town will cost roughly the same.
Oh, wow.
But that data is inherently flawed.
Because the environment is entirely different.
Right. The soil composition might require a completely different foundation strategy. The hyperlocal logistics, like the turning radius for trucks, getting into that specific city block,
Right.
or the noise ordinances in that neighborhood, those completely alter the timeline and the labor cost. You cannot copy-paste reality.
But looking at this logically, isn't there a massive behavioral problem here too? I mean, it's not just bad data, it's the lowest bid mentality.
That is the core driver.
Yeah.
The construction industry is heavily commoditized, meaning the primary differentiator is almost always price. The cheapest price wins the tender.
Right.
So put yourself in the shoes of a massive contractor bidding for a mega project. How do you submit the lowest price?
You have to assume everything goes perfectly.
Exactly. You strip out every layer of contingency. You make the most aggressive, blindly optimistic assumptions about unknown risks.
Wow.
You assume it will never rain, materials will never be delayed at port, the ground will be perfectly stable, and labor costs will remain totally flat for 3 years.
That is wild.
The contractor who effectively ignores the most reality is the one who wins the job.
That sounds like an utterly terrifying way to run a business. Why would any CEO sign a contract knowing the math only works in a fantasy world?
Because of the practical reality of the GCC market right now. You have intense competition. And relative to the number of massive contractors, you have limited tender opportunities.
Okay.
Contractors have very weak negotiation leverage. They have massive overheads, thousands of laborers, fleets of heavy machinery that cost them millions every month, whether they are building or not.
They just have to feed the beast.
They have to feed the beast. So they willingly sign heavily employer-biased, one-sided contracts just to keep the cash flowing and the workforce busy.
I have to push back here, though. If everyone at the table, the developer, the contractor, the consultants, if they all know that no two buildings are alike and they know the contractor is lowballing to win the bid, Why do developers still demand a rigid, fixed-price contract up front?
It's a great question.
Isn't that just institutional delusion? Why not work on a cost-plus model?
It is a delusion, but it's a necessary delusion driven by project financing.
Hmm.
Put yourself in the developer's shoes.
Okay.
They aren't paying for this out of their own pocket. They are going to a syndicate of major banks.
Right.
You cannot walk into a lender's office and say, we want to build the world's tallest tower, and we think it'll cost somewhere between $1 and $2 billion. We'll just figure it out as we go.
Oh, I see. The banks want a guarantee.
Yes. Lenders require absolute ironclad certainty before they release a single cent of capital. They need a fixed yield, a fixed timeline, and a fixed cost.
So the finance world demands certainty, and the physics of construction guarantees uncertainty. And the entire ecosystem is just forced to pretend the spreadsheet is real.
This raises an important question about what happens when the spreadsheet collides with the physical world.
Right, because a budget based on pure optimism is going to get absolutely shredded. Construction is inherently unpredictable.
Absolutely.
We see countless examples in the data of scorching weather completely halting crane operations for days, or earthworks crews digging down and finding unmapped ancient utilities that take months to reroute.
Yeah.
Or even geopolitical shifts where a sudden tariff completely ruins the margin on imported materials.
And this is where we transition from theoretical risk to hard data. Recent major industry reports show that up to 30% of GCC construction projects have suffered timeline slippage just over a recent 12-month period.
30%?
Yeah, 30%.
That is a staggering failure rate for project management on this scale.
And you have to look at what's driving it. It's heavily influenced by supply chain constraints, global shipping reroutes, and a massive pivot toward eco-friendly, specialized imported materials.
So building green is incredibly complex.
It really is. And the cost escalation is brutal. We're seeing up to a 7% cost increase purely from tariffs and inflation on imported steel, aluminum, and advanced mechanical components.
Okay, let's put this in perspective. You have a contractor who won the bid by assuming steel prices would stay flat, and they cut their contingency budget to zero just to beat the competition.
Right.
Suddenly, they get hit with a 7% spike on the structural steel required to even build the skeleton of the building. Where does that money come from?
It doesn't exist. They're instantly operating at a massive loss. This highlights the crucial difference between risk management and risk prediction.
Okay.
You cannot predict a global shipping bottleneck or a sudden regional conflict that reroutes freighters. Prediction is impossible.
Right.
But risk management is about building structural resilience. The data clearly shows that effective integrated risk management can actually reduce the impact of unpredictable delays by up to 20%.
It feels like unrealistic cost planning is like tailgating at 80 miles an hour on the highway. It works perfectly fine until the guy in front of you taps his brakes even slightly.
Yes.
Then it's a massive fiery pileup.
That is exactly the mechanism at play, because you have no buffer. When that pileup happens and those external risks materialize, the contractor is instantly starved of cash.
Right.
And this initiates a vicious cascading downward spiral throughout the entire project ecosystem.
Let's follow that money, or the lack of it, downstream. Because the financial strain doesn't just hurt the main contractor. It fundamentally breaks the entire supply chain.
The underlying flaw here goes back to the financing structure. Frequently, these massive projects are not fully funded in liquid cash from day one.
Right.
The developer expects the project to eventually fund itself through off-plan sales or phased financing, which forces the main contractor to essentially act as a heavily leveraged bank for the developer.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The financial architecture creates something called a cash trap. How does a massive multinational construction firm get financially trapped on their own site?
Let's walk through the math of standard international contracts.
Yeah.
When a contractor wins a job, they don't just start building. They have to provide unconditional performance guarantees.
Oh.
Typically, that is a 10% performance bond. That means they have to lock up 10% of the total project value in a bank guarantee, proving they can finish the job.
Wow.
On top of that, the client holds back or retained usually 5 to 10% of every single monthly progress payment to ensure the work is defect-free at the end.
So if it's $1 billion project right out of the gate, tens of millions of dollars of the contractor's working capital are locked in a vault, entirely inaccessible.
Yes. And remember, they bid this job with zero margin for error. So when the real-world delays hit and their costs spike by 7%, they are hemorrhaging money.
Right.
Now add in the fact that clients who are also managing their own tight financing frequently delay the monthly progress payments to the contractor when the project starts running behind schedule.
So the contractor suffocates.
They absolutely suffocate. They cannot make payroll. They cannot buy materials.
Yeah.
And when a drowning person's looking for air, they pull down whoever's closest to them.
So the main contractor stops paying their subcontractors.
Exactly.
And this is where the human and operational element really comes into focus. You have hundreds of specialized subcontractors on these sites. What happens to them?
They face immediate insolvency. A fascinating and terrifying trend, detailed in recent market analysis, is that major, highly skilled players, particularly in the MEP sector, which is mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, have actively abandoned the GCC market entirely.
Wait, they are just leaving. The companies responsible for the nervous system of these mega projects, the complex HVAC systems required in a 50 degrees Celsius environment, the advanced electrical grids, they are just walking away from billions of dollars in potential work.
They have to. The risk profile is completely unmanageable. They're constantly forced to underprice their work to win jobs from desperate main contractors, and then they don't get paid for months on end.
Right.
If the main contractor goes bankrupt, the MEP sub loses everything. So the elite firms, the ones with the highest quality standards, simply refuse to bid.
Think about the ramifications of that. If the best plumbers, electricians, and mechanical engineers refuse to work on a luxury skyscraper because the financial structure is a suicide pact, who is actually building it?
It leads to a tragic irony. The region is now experiencing a scenario where developers are paying progressively higher end costs for significantly lower quality work, simply because the reliable, skilled supply chain has been systematically starved out of existence.
Wow.
You're left with second or third tier subcontractors who are desperate enough to sign terrible contracts, but perhaps lack the capacity to deliver complex engineering.
So we have a site where the client is holding back money, the main contractor is bleeding cash and squeezing the subs, and the highly skilled subs have left town.
Yeah.
What does this do to the daily culture on the construction site? You have thousands of people trying to build something monumental together while financially starving each other.
The site transforms. It ceases to be a collaborative engineering workspace and devolves into a hostile legal battleground. It ushers in an environment of adversarial procurement.
Everyone stops trying to build the building and starts trying to survive the contract.
Precisely.
And that survival mode changes how every single day is managed. One of the most striking things in the data is how deficient designs are actively weaponized in this environment.
If we connect this back to how contracts are signed, standard international agreements heavily presuppose that the contractor is given a complete flawless set of design blueprints from day one.
Right.
But in reality, on these fast-track GCC mega projects, developers want to start pouring concrete while the upper floors are still being designed.
Which makes the idea of a fixed lump sum price completely laughable. You literally cannot price a fixed amount if the blueprint doesn't exist yet.
Yet they are forced to. And because the main contractor is operating at a loss, they push these same ambiguous, harsh terms down to the subcontractors through back-to-back obligations.
Right.
If the developer changes their mind and wants marble instead of tile in the lobby, that scope creep spirals out of control. The subcontractor demands more money, the main contractor says they can't pay until the developer pays, and work simply stops.
Everyone is terrified of being blamed for the inevitable delay. And this introduces a concept that I found incredibly revealing about human nature under pressure. Float sequestration, or the float game.
Yeah, the float game.
Can we dive into how this actually works mechanically?
The float game is the ultimate symptom of a total collapse in project trust. In construction scheduling, float is simply the amount of buffer time you have to complete a specific task before it delays the final delivery date of the entire project.
Okay.
In a healthy project, float is a shared resource, a shock absorber for the inevitable hiccups.
But in survival mode, nobody shares the shock absorber.
Contractors will manipulate their scheduling software. They will artificially inflate the time it takes to complete tasks, saying a concrete pour will take 3 weeks instead of 1, specifically to hoard that float for themselves, hiding it from the developer.
And what is the developer doing in response?
The developer's project managers are doing the exact same thing in reverse. When the contractor submits a complex structural drawing for approval, a process called a request for information or RFI, the owner will deliberately extend their review time to the absolute contractual limit.
Oh, man.
They hoard the float on their end to protect themselves from financial penalties and keep control of the timeline.
It's like two roommates who realize a blizzard is coming, and they both secretly hoard all the toilet paper in their own closets because they don't trust the other person to share.
Right.
They ultimately create a massive crisis inside the house that they were both trying to avoid.
It creates a self-fulfilling paradox. The attempts to fiercely protect against risk actually exacerbate the delay. You have entire teams of engineers sitting on their hands, not building, just generating defensive paperwork to protect their legal position for the inevitable lawsuit.
So what does this all mean? The site is paralyzed, the budget is blown, the quality is compromised, and eventually the project either limps across the finish line years late, or it stalls out completely as an empty concrete shell. There's only one place left to go.
Yes, the financial reckoning. We move from project administration to the arbitration battlefield.
This is a huge part of understanding this ecosystem, because formal arbitration isn't just a couple of guys arguing in a boardroom. It is a highly structured, brutal, and incredibly expensive autopsy of a failed project.
The biggest misconception professionals have when they move from the chaotic construction site to the sterile arbitration room is assuming that tribunals operate on common sense or general fairness.
They don't.
They do not. A major construction arbitration is won by forensic project records, delay analysis, and quantum, which is the highly technical financial assessment of damages.
There is a massive distinction drawn here between a fact and an assertion.
This is where cases collapse. On a busy site, a commercial manager might dash off an angry email to the developer saying, "You guys delayed us by 3 weeks because you didn't give us the HVAC drawings on time."
Right.
In the real world, everyone knows that's true, but in arbitration, that email is just an assertion. It is legally meaningless on its own.
Because the tribunal demands an unbroken chain of evidence.
They require a rigorous causal chain. And it works like this. First, you must prove the event, what exactly happened and when. Second, contractual entitlement. Where in this 1,000-page document does it say the developer wasn't allowed to do that?
Right.
Third, and this is the hardest, causation.
Let's break causation down. Say the developer absolutely was late delivering the HVAC drawings. Why isn't that enough?
Because the developer's lawyers will look at the daily site logs and say, yes, we were late with the HVAC drawings, but your heavy lifting crane was broken down that entire month anyway,
right?
And you didn't have enough laborers on site to install the HVAC, even if you had the drawings.
Oh, wow. So they find another reason.
Exactly. They say, therefore, our delay did not cause your delay on the critical path. If you cannot prove exclusive causation, you get zero relief.
And that leads to quantum, proving the exact dollar amount lost directly tied to that specific delay. Which brings up a desperate tactic the industry calls global claims.
Right. When a contractor's record keeping is so poor that they cannot establish that strict causal chain, they attempt a global claim. They basically throw a massive spreadsheet at the tribunal and say, look, we plan to spend $500 million. We actually spent $700 million. The site was a mess. You caused most of it. So just pay us the $200 million difference.
They just dump the entire mess on the judge's desk and hope for sympathy.
And international tribunals despise it.
Yeah.
They will almost always reject it because the developer's defense is incredibly simple. They will point out that the contractor originally underquoted the project to win the bid in the first place, meaning the budget was doomed from day one. If the developer can prove that even a fraction of the losses were due to the contractor's own poor management or lowball bidding, the entire global claim unravels.
Okay, let's unpack the reality of this for the people on the ground. If a commercial manager on a massive site knows they are bleeding money today, what exact evidence do they need to be collecting on a random Tuesday to make sure their company survives a brutal arbitration 3 years from now?
They have to operate as forensic documentarians. They need a mountain of contemporaneous records, daily site reports detailing exactly how many men were on site, what trade they were, and what specific grid line they were working on.
Just extreme detail.
Meticulous meeting minutes, digitally tracked RFIs, plant and equipment logs showing what machinery was active versus idle, photographs with geotags and timestamps.
But wait, in normal legal discovery, you just hand over all the hard drives and say, have at it, right? Why doesn't that work here?
Because of the sheer volume. A multi-billion-dollar project generates millions of emails, drawings, and revisions. If you just jump that on a tribunal, you lose. In international arbitration, they use tools like Redfern schedules for document production. You have to clearly map out, I need this specific category of document to prove this specific contractual proposition, which links to this specific delay.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. You must build a flawless chronology connecting the date, the event, the contractual clause, and the financial consequence line by agonizing lines.
So arbitration is essentially an autopsy that takes years and costs tens of millions of dollars in legal and expert fees alone. It's a lose-lose scenario. How do professionals prevent the patient from dying in the first place? How do we cure this?
The cure demands absolute professional risk mitigation and commercial integrity, starting long before the contract is signed. The most critical tool is a robust options appraisal report.
What does that actually look like in practice? Because it sounds like corporate jargon for think before you build.
It is a highly structured process of thinking before you build. Instead of just falling in love with a shiny architectural render and guessing the price, you evaluate multiple variations in design construction methods and procurement strategies.
Right.
You establish strict criteria: time, cost, lifecycle quality, and sustainability. Then you rigorously stress test your options against those criteria using feasibility studies and risk assessments.
But how do you validate that initial budget to make sure it isn't just that optimistic fantasy we talked about earlier?
You use benchmarking against similar recently completed projects in the exact same region, adjusting heavily for current market inflation. And you run sensitivity analysis.
What is that?
You don't just ask, what does this cost today? You ask the math, what happens to our margin if the price of imported structural steel goes up 12% next year? What if we lose 40 days to extreme heat protocols? You build the bad news into the baseline.
And once the concrete actually starts pouring, you have to constantly check the patient's vitals. The commercial teams use tools like CVR and CTC. How do those actually function mechanically?
CVR is cost-value reconciliation. It's an ongoing, usually monthly, forensic audit of profitability. You are constantly comparing the hard costs incurred against the actual value of the work completed on site. If your cost centers are suddenly flashing red, you don't just hope it gets better next month. You immediately conduct a work study.
Right.
Why are we over budget on concrete? Are our resources sitting idle? Is the procurement team ordering materials too early and paying for storage?
And CTC.
Cost to complete. This is done every few months. It is a ruthless forecast of the exact cost of all remaining work based on current on-the-ground reality, not the original tender document.
Ah.
You take what you have already spent, add what you realistically need to spend, and compare it to the budget. It is designed to prevent that terrifying scenario where a developer reaches the 90% completion mark and suddenly realizes the bank account is utterly empty.
This places a staggering amount of pressure on the quantity surveyor and the commercial manager on site.
It is their absolute duty to be the guardians of commercial integrity. They cannot be passive. They must establish a strong commercial function from day one. This means strict adherence to notice requirements. If the contract says you have 7 days to notify the client of a variation that will cost money, you notify them on day 3 every single time. As the saying goes in this space, if it is not recorded, it cannot be recovered.
Here's where I have to push back, though. When that budget inevitably starts to bleed, the very first thing everyone in the boardroom shouts is value engineering.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't value engineering just a polite corporate way of saying we're completely broke, so we're going to use cheaper garbage materials to save the budget?
That is the dark reality of how the term is misused in a panic.
Yeah.
What you are describing is just desperate late-stage cost-cutting.
Yeah.
It is stripping out quality to save cash, which destroys the life cycle value of the asset. True value engineering is a highly systematic engineering-led method to improve the value of goods or services by examining their function. In this context, value is strictly defined as the ratio of function to cost.
So you keep the exact same function, but you find a fundamentally smarter way to achieve it.
Exactly. You ask questions like, can we achieve the same structural load capacity with a different locally sourced material rather than an imported one?
Oh, I see.
Can we alter a complex, bespoke architectural joint that takes weeks to weld into a modular piece that serves the exact same structural purpose but installs in 2 days?
Right.
True value engineering happens early during the design and options appraisal phase. Late-stage cost-cutting is just emergency damage control.
So looking at this entire journey, unrealistic cost planning isn't just a math error. It's not just a junior estimator forgetting to carry a one on a spreadsheet.
No, definitely not.
It is a massive systemic failure that actively destroys trust, bankrupts vital supply chains, ruins the quality of the built environment, and feeds a booming multi-million-dollar arbitration industry.
It is a perfect storm.
Oh.
And it is entirely created by the intense financial pressure to provide absolute certainty in an inherently uncertain physical environment.
We've seen how this plays out. We know the industry routinely accepts the absolute lowest bid, with everyone fully aware that the price is built on highly aggressive, if not totally impossible, assumptions about risk, weather, and logistics.
Right.
So here's something to chew on as we wrap up this deep dive. If an entire multi-billion-dollar ecosystem structurally requires its participants to lie to each other on day one just to get a project funded and started, at what point does accepting that lowest bid transition from being smart business to intentional self-sabotage? Is this industry actually focused on building skyscrapers? Or are they just engineering future lawsuits? Keep learning, keep questioning, and definitely look a lot closer at the numbers the next time someone promises they can build it faster and cheaper than anyone else in the room.